Welcome to Chapter 17, Section 2, the Enlightenment. Let's get going. Alright, philosophers, people who could apply reason to all aspects of life. So, everything that had reason, concepts of reason, beliefs that they had, all united them together. And these guys would argue about the different values of those, how those concepts work, how those beliefs worked. So the 5 concepts or beliefs that they talked about were reason, nature, natural rights type of ideals, happiness, whether that was in property or anything else, and then progress, improving everything, and then liberty or freedoms. John Locke is one of these guys. People were reasonable beings. We've talked about him before. Talked about him versus Hobbes. But Locke in the social contract, his ideal that everything was in a state of natural rights or freedoms, and that human beings were reasonable. Government was in existence to protect those natural rights. So people are born with 3 natural rights: life, liberty, and property. And obviously the United States would change that later to be pursuit of happiness. Okay, and the purpose of government, again, is to protect those rights. Baron de Montesquieu, some of you are doing your project on him. He devoted his time and study to political liberties. We've talked about his book on the spirit of laws. You saw a little bit of him in your DBQs. Separation of powers was his big deal. So power should be checked to power. That meant that no one should have all the power within themselves. The power was split up into different branches of the government, and each of those branches had their own powers and could check and keep the other from gaining too much power. Such as the president has the right or the ability to veto any law that is made by the legislative branch. Now, the legislative branch can check that power as well by having the ability to vote to overturn that, and they need 3/4 of the vote to get that overturned. But again, power check to power, separation of powers, that is Montesquieu. Francois Marie Arouet, or better known to us as Voltaire. Voltaire was his pen name. He was very satirical in his writing, wrote over 70 books, political essays, philosophy, dramas, all kinds of stuff. His dramas were typically satirical and political at the same time. He often made fun of the king. In fact, there was one play where he was making fun of the king within the play. The king was actually sitting in the audience, laughing about the play, watching it, having a great old time, and finally one of his advisors leans over, hits him with the elbow and says, "Hey, you realize he's making fun of you." And Voltaire got kicked out of the country. This happened, he got kicked out of the country a couple of different times where he was actually living, but it never stopped him from fighting for tolerance, reason, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, all these kinds of things for the betterment of society, and Voltaire was a big voice for those. Denis Diderot is known for making the encyclopedia. He's first to bring together all the ideals into a set or a volume of different things. His way was, it was a general purpose, a general way of thinking, and that was the purpose behind it. He got criticized very much for doing this. It was ideals that the church didn't want out. It was ideals that other people said the general public doesn't need to know. They told him he would incite revolutions and all this other kind of stuff just by producing this volume of knowledge for people. Today we have encyclopedias. So Diderot was the man who made that possible, trying to get all those ideals out to people and to the general public, as well as all the aristocrats and all the others above. Adam Smith. Adam Smith is our philosopher. He writes on the wealth of nations, laissez-faire, the three roles of government. His idea is that the people should be able to do what they want. And basically that means within the confinements of the government. And also he applied it more to the economic side than to anything else. So government should keep its hands out of business, basically, is what Adam Smith was talking about. He said that the three roles of government were to protect society, defend the citizens, and then upkeep the public works, roads, plumbing, whatever else. Okay? Beccaria. Beccaria is our man on common abuses of justice. He saw those times we talked about within the courts where people were tortured, inquisition, heresy, tortured into confessions, torturing suspects, as well as witnesses to get the witness to say what they wanted. Irregular court proceedings. In the American Revolution, you had court proceedings where they would have the court proceeding and then they would say, okay, he's guilty, and they'd say, that's great because we hung him in a tree 2 days ago. So they had already convicted him and hung him before the actual trial was finished. So these were things that happened, and these are the things that Beccaria spoke out about and produced documents on cruel and unusual punishment and all of these types of things. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau, we should know from our DBQ, talked about individual freedoms. Civilization corrupts people, that man was born free, and that everywhere else he's in change. That man is chained down by government, and that the reason that government exists is to protect individual freedoms. Okay, so Rousseau is another one that talked about individual freedoms, about being able to, if you weren't in this situation, you'd be able to do it in a different way. Mary Wollstonecraft writes the book A Vindication of the Rights of Women. Obviously, Mary Wollstonecraft is talking about, you guessed it, women's rights. Okay, so women's rights and a big movement in women's rights, and that's Mary Wollstonecraft. Growth of reading happens during the time. There's a change in books, you get magazines, you get newspapers, all of this based off the ability to produce them faster, quicker, better because of the printing press. And the printing press being developed earlier in the time period allowed all these things to be mass produced. They were cheaper, easier to get to, general public could afford them in most cases and situations, and the ideas of the Enlightenment got out to the world. Salons. No, it's not where women go to get their hair and nails done. It is, however, wealthy women of Paris who welcomed others into their homes so that they could, guess what? Gossip. They still do that in salons? I think so. But they were trying to get these ideas out to people, and they wanted to show their wealth. They wanted to show that they knew these guys, that they were popular, that they were good people, all this other kind of stuff. So they held these salons where people could come in, talk about these philosophies. They would often invite these philosophers to come talk. So you might see a John Locke or a Montesquieu or a Rousseau at somebody's home and talking about their ideas of whatever it may be, individual freedoms, or money issues, protection of individual rights, natural freedoms, whatever it may be. Religion is John Wesley. John Wesley takes a look at religion and says, great that y'all reformed back then, but y'all have kind of lost some of your ideals. So we're going to go back to some of those ideals and we're going to teach them. And he talked about inner piety, or studying the religion to make oneself smarter. And John Wesley brings about the Methodist Church. So we get the Methodist Church and reform in church from John Wesley, talking about salvation being from the grace of God, not through good works, basically. All right. That's the end of section 2. So let's move on to section 3. Section 3, we're going to talk about the impact of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment ideals influenced everything, not only the political world, not only government. They affected the artistic world as well. And the ideas spread very quickly throughout Europe from 1550 to 1789. You say, that's quickly? Yes, during this time it's quickly, because remember, no Twitter, no Facebook, no Snapchat, no text messaging, no CNN News, no Fox News, no television. It takes a while for ideas to get out there. So this time period, 130 years, 230 years, is very quickly to get these ideas all throughout Europe, and all of these different things going on throughout Europe and the Americas as well. Art and architecture. Architecture reverts to Baroque style. We've talked about Baroque style, the grand style, the show of power, eloquence, all of those kinds of things. It was, the style that made them look towards everything. Then you had Baroque music with Bach and Handel, and then classical music with Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven. Another art style that comes into existence during the time is Rococo. Rococo was very fluid type motions, very fluid lines, kind of symmetry throughout, so they kind of balanced out their paintings and balanced out their ideals. And so Rococo is this kind of smooth style, where the Baroque was very grand to stir up the emotions. Rococo is very eloquent. Literature. Our common day novel style of writing starts to emerge with guys like Samuel Richardson and Henry Fielding. And the style that you kind of read today in those fiction books that you like to read is the style that these two gentlemen brought to the forefront. And it really emerges during the Enlightenment time period, and is kind of the same style that we've used ever since. Absolutism during the time. We've kind of talked about some of these absolute rulers already that had some changes that they did during the Enlightenment period. Frederick the Great, who was the Prussian leader, he was the one who tried the most Enlightenment reforms, trying to give power back to the people, trying to give people some of their rights. They were very accepting of it in Prussia, and still accepting of the ruler. However, in other areas, they're not as accepting. And so most of the changes that happen throughout Europe with Enlightenment ideals are very, very minimal. Such as Joseph II, who was the Austrian ruler. His only contribution was to abolish serfdom. So there were no more serfs within Austria. And he ordered that all those serfs who have now become peasants, all those peasants are to be paid in cash. Why pay them in cash? Obviously, just as you just thought. I know you had this thought. The paying them in cash, gets the money into the market, circulates the money, and causes his economy to go up. And the economy of Austria would go up. So it allowed for them to be a better country. Catherine the Great also imposes some very limited reforms. However, as with most times that we've talked about it, what happens when there's a female ruler? Somebody's going to step up to challenge her power. So when the female ruler gives limited reforms, she's seen as even weaker than we think she is. So now this woman who's in charge is really weak because she just gave us a whole bunch of powers. And when she tries to give limited reforms to the peasants see it as an opportunity to take over the government, and she has a peasant uprising that she has to deal with, which changes her views on the peasants and the serfs. And she turns around and says, okay, guess what, nobles? Y'all have all the power over the nobles, over the serfs. And Charles VI, once he becomes the Austrian king, his only heir to the throne is a daughter, Maria Theresa. So when he passes away around 1740, his daughter Maria Theresa comes to power. Again, woman to the throne, somebody comes to take the power, and that would be Frederick the Great. So Frederick the Great from Prussia attacks Austria. France gets involved. France and Austria have a long relationship of not liking each other. So when France gets involved, the other people who don't like France, Great Britain, get involved. So the British join the Austrian side, the French join the Prussian side. This war lasts for 8 years. At the end of 8 years, nobody's really gotten any advantages or gained anything. The French gain a little bit of land, but most of it, when it's all said and done and they write the Treaty of La Chapelle, that treaty basically says everybody go back to where you were except for France. You get this little piece of land, and that's it. Okay. So then it turns around in the 7 Years' War, because France had made this slight little gain, and it turns around in the next war, and France now chooses to side with the Austrians. The Russians join in as well. Great Britain wants to be opposite of France, so they turn to the Prussian side. So you have Frederick the Great, and this war becomes, again, within Europe, becomes a stalemate. Nobody can really win either side, especially once the Russians withdraw. You got France and Austria against Great Britain and Prussia, and there's really a stalemate. So in 1763, 7 years after this war started, they call another stalemate, and they say, okay, everybody go back home. Okay, so again, nothing really accomplished in these wars as far as Europe's concerned. Where the real accomplishment is for the English in other areas around the world. In India, the British are able to win with numbers and persistence. They didn't have real great leadership, but they had the numbers, and they are able to fend off the French. They are able to resupply. It takes longer for the French to resupply. The British have locals in the area. The colonies that they had established in India helped them out. They had the Sepoy leaders in the area, and they were able to take over all of India and control all of India. The war in North America is also known, write it down, as the French and Indian War. War in America, North America, is also known as the French and Indian War. It is the British versus the French The French would get the help of Native American groups. That's not to say that some didn't join the British. There were a couple who did join the British, opposite of enemies on the other side. This is where the greatest conflict of war happened. This is where the colonists who are there that are British actually learn how to fight in Native American styles against Native Americans in the area. This is going to be a great attribute for them when we talk about Section 4 and the American Revolution. Okay. At the end, the Treaty of Paris is written on these areas. Britain gains all of North America, or just about all of North America. The French give up their holds in North America to the British based off of the 7 Years' War. They also give up all of India. Great Britain would have colonies in China as well, or ties to China as well. So this is the time period when we've referred to the statement a couple of times. The sun never sets on the British Empire. And Britain emerges in 1763 as the largest colonial power in the world and the most powerful country in the world after defeating the French a couple of times. That is the end of the notes for sections 2 and 3. Much easier than 30 minutes for 2 days, right? It gets us through. Thank you for watching. Hope it was a little bit enjoyable for you, and we'll see you tomorrow at school.